the Snow West Show. I'm Ryan Harris. Today's episode is brought to you by Skidoo. We're going to talk about the 2025 Skidoo mountain snowmobiles. We've got the Summit X with Expert Package, and the Freeride. Three very similar but very distinct snowmobiles. But we're going to bring in a couple Skidoo ambassadors. These two gentlemen have spent a lot of time on snowmobiles. They both have backgrounds in racing, but they spend a ton of time on snowmobiles in the mountains and in the backcountry, riding the same stuff that you and I do. So we're going to bring in Carl Kuster and Steve Martin. We'll start here with Carl Kuster. Carl with CKMP up in Canada. How are you doing, Carl?
Not too bad. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, it's been a couple weeks. We were out in on the other side of Canada together at the launch. Yeah, and then
Go ahead.
let's bring in Steve Martin. Steve Martin, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for making time to come on here. This will be fun. So we've had this conversation several times, over the last couple years. And we'll just dive right in here. So the 2025 Skidoo has a pretty unique mountain lineup. We have the Summit X and the Summit X with Expert Package, and then the Freeride. So three very capable mountain sleds designed for deep snow, mountain riding, western riding. But there's been some emphasis from Skidoo lately to make sure that you build the sled that's right for you. Yeah, all three of these sleds are mountain sleds, and they're very capable in deep snow. And I kind of break this down. I've been trying to figure out what's an analogy that we can do here. So it'd be kind of similar to like looking at a Toyota Tacoma, a Tundra, and a 4Runner. All three vehicles will get you to the same place, but you might have specific needs. Maybe you're more into overland or adventure, or you need to haul something. So you need to have the right vehicle, and that's no different really than Skidoo's 25 mountain lineup. There's three distinct models there, and they're all capable of getting you to the same place, but they all do it in a very different way. Carl, you touched on something at launch a couple weeks ago with the Summit X. How is the Summit X different than the other two in your mind?
Well, it's man, it can be. It really boils down to what the consumer or what the customer is looking to accomplish. But I think there's a little bit, where we got to kind of clear the air, or not clear the air, but like maybe make some, better distinctions between the X and the Expert, or X with Expert Package. Freeride, I think people probably grasp that a little bit. It does fit in its obvious category with, bump absorption, like great shocks, and the narrow track or 15-inch track, so it's for fast. And that's not what you're going to pick if the snow it's capable in chest deep snow, or waist deep snow, but it's really between the other two where it's harder to differentiate between an Expert and an X. And really, I was thinking about it this morning, and it's like maybe the X is more, like if you were an artist and you're just kind of going over here, doing a loop through the trees, and then you decide to go back over, jump the creek, do something over there, and you're just kind of rolling around, snooping through the trees, whereas the Expert is more like the smash and grab. You're just going to come ripping through, old tracks or whatever, and then kind of blow through the old tracks and then go, continue up the drainage or whatever. And it's really, and maybe you're going over a little bit of logs or whatever, and it's more of a smash and grab type of riding. Maybe, I don't know if that's the right, it's hard to differentiate that, or how to describe, not differentiate, but how to describe it, because there's a lot of different interpretations of that.
Yeah, what do you think there, Steve, differentiating the Summit X from the Expert Package?
Yeah, I see what Carl's trying to say. It's like when I ride the Summit X, it's such a comfortable feel. I'm not using as much energy to ride it. I can effortlessly put it on one ski and cruise around, and I feel like on a long, deep day. Actually, my dad rides a Summit X, and I ride a Freeride, and we go the same places, but my experience is a lot different because I also have an Expert, a 23 Expert, and I'm side hilling every nasty side hill I can see, and he just won't follow me. He knows where I'm going, so he'll pick the nice, smooth route through the trees, and I'm like side hilling some nasty side hill, like Carl said, with exposed logs sticking out. And I like, if I see one of those, I will intentionally direct myself to it so I can get air on a side hill. And then sometimes there's open water. So I have that trust of like the T-Motion XT and those new KYB Pro 36 front shocks. It's a little stiffer calibration, so it's going to give me more confidence and precision in technical terrain. But the Summit X is going to be more light, more nimble, more playful. Like, I think what we're trying to say is like it's harder to explain the differences, but if you ride them side by side, it's a completely different feel. And I think if you have to really think about what you're doing the majority of the time to improve the experience. It's like season long.
Yeah, and we've all been on the mountain, and I think all listeners can understand this. You know, anywhere you go ride in the mountains, you have a path that's more out in the open, maybe closer to the meadows. You're kind of following the terrain, a little easier going, where you're less likely to get stuck. The consequence for getting stuck is not there. And then you have a kind of a shortcut path that's through the trees and through the creeks and over the logs, like you're talking about, Steve. That's a more difficult path, requires a little more precision. It's a little more aggressive to take that path, and that's kind of where, you know, the Summit Expert is better suited for, is that shortcut through the trees, the Summit X. If you're not taking that shortcut and you're staying down in the open areas and you just want to play in the powder and have an enjoyable day on the snow, the Summit X is the way to go there. And then, man, if you want to go to the top of the ridge and jump off the cornices and hit every mogul you can find, then the Freeride is your ticket.
Yeah, for sure. And and the Summit X, they're all like premium models. One's not better than the other by any means. Like, you can ride that Summit X in the same terrain, and I think it comes down to like how much speed are you carrying. And some people are having more fun at a nice smooth pace, or they're a smoother rider. And then there's guys that the throttle is an on and off switch, and you're gonna want that full rod track, the T-Motion XT, and those stiffer front shocks. But maybe you're a really smooth, fluid rider. You know, like I've heard Carl Kuster and Tony Jenkins say they prefer the Summit X, their favorite snowmobile of all time, and they're like some of the best riders in the world. So it doesn't even come down to skill level. It comes down to riding your riding style.
Carl, talk about that a little bit. Like, why is it that you prefer the Summit X?
You know, I was thinking, just listening to Steve's explanation, which I think is pretty spot on. But, you know, one thing that maybe people is, I don't know, it's not a difficult subject, but it's like, man, you think of, when I think of the snowmobiles, X or Expert, you know, is really, I think of size of the person that's riding it too, you know. So if you're, because you can make them do fairly or pretty much the same thing, but if you have somebody that's, you know, a big dude or big person that's, you know, 6'3" and 240 pounds before they put gear on, like, man, then I would probably steer them. If they're gonna, depends on what track length they like. If they're gonna want to ride a 154 and they're that big, I would say Expert for sure. You know, because they don't need their size and leverage will easily overcome the XT style rear suspension, where it's no T-Motion. You know, but if you're like only 140 pounds before you put gear on, and you're like 5'6", then maybe the X, you know, you could ride that in a 154 or even a 65. Depends if you want to float through the trees and stay, or not float through the trees, but like, you know, kind of stay up on top of the snow more, and you want to, you know, go do some really slow technical stuff, not slow, but just technical, you know, through the trees and fresh powder, and you're kind of going up and down and changing elevation, and then you want to turn and do a immediate 180 degrees and go back the other way, then that's where the X works awesome, you know. And it really, I think if you're a bigger, taller person, I would tend to steer them potentially towards the Expert even, you know, whereas the X would be for smaller, smaller folks potentially. I mean, I like riding the X, but I like riding it in one track length longer than I would in an Expert. So if I had to pick two sleds, I would probably go 154 Expert for my weight, and I'm about 190 pounds before I put gear on, and I'm pretty much 6 feet. And if I was going to ride an X, I would ride that in the 165. I don't know if that makes it more clear or worse, but you really have to think of, when you're breaking down the sled of, how you want to ride it. If you want to ride with the skis light, you can do it in both the X and the Expert. You'll just get more out of the Expert, I think, if you ride it in one track, like in a longer track length, and pardon me, you'll get more out of the X if you ride it in a longer track length. And the Expert is funner, I feel, and it's just my opinion, in a shorter track length. Because then it's about more carrying speed and just ripping through stuff, and you can get away with that on a shorter track.
Yeah, that makes great sense. Real quick, while we're talking Summit X versus Expert, let's hit on the similarities and then go into the differences. These two, in fact, the Freeride included, they're all built on the Rev Gen 5 platform, so they all have the similar look. The Summit X and the Summit Expert are available in the same colorways for 2025. Same engine packages. You can get the 850 E-Tech Turbo R or the 850 E-Tech naturally aspirated. You can get both of these sleds, the Summit X and the Summit Expert package, in the same track lengths and track configurations, 154, 165. You can get 3-inch track and you can get 2.5-inch track. The differences, though, where it comes down to, and again, they both have the same 34-inch ski stance. They both have an adjustable limiter strap, so you can pick and choose, how playful that front end is. The differences, though, Steve, talk about the difference in the rear suspensions versus Summit X versus Expert.
Well, the biggest one, and you can see by just looking at it, is the X has T-Motion, whereas the Expert has T-Motion XT, the solid rear arm. And the Expert has a full rod track, so it does not have flex edge. And then the Expert also has slightly stiffer shock valving. So that makes a huge difference, those three things. And like when I rode the new Summit X in West Yellowstone last week, I couldn't believe how light it felt. And it was just like, I know I could ride that thing 100 miles, go put another tank of gas in it and go another 100. There was like no effort there with that 34-inch front end. It was so light and nimble. And then the Expert requires a little more effort with the DS4 ski and the stiffer shock valving, T-Motion XT, and that full rod track. But it really rewards you if you're riding it really hard.
So to really kind of bullet point the differences, the difference would be the rear suspension on the Summit X pivots side to side, so the snowmobile can tip over more easily. The track has a flex edge on the Summit X, so again, it can tip a little easier, and it has a different ski. It has a Pilot DS3 ski, where the Summit Expert has a rigid rear suspension that does not flex. The track is full rod, does not have the flex edge, so it again does not flex, and the ski is a little more aggressive, Pilot DS4. So that creates a difference in riding that you're going to feel, where one is really, the X is super easy to initiate, to get it to lean over and roll. The Summit Expert is going to have a little more precise, defined edge. So if you're doing some side heeling and precise lines, it's going to have a harder bite into a side heel.
Yeah, especially at high speed, that's where I noticed the difference with the full rod track. And the Expert has the KYB Pro 36s with the 3-click adjusters on them, similar to the Freeride, the little smaller piston size, but
yeah, it's a little more aggressive shock package there.
The T-Motion XT and that full rod track, one way to describe it, I was riding the other day and I was like wide open on a side hill carrying a ton of speed, and like the sled left the ground around like the pinnacle or the edge of the ridge, and then there was a huge drift and I was in the air and I just like tapped it with the track, and the sled was wide open and it stayed completely flat, and I landed on the side hill and kept going. And I think that's where you're going to see the benefits of T-Motion XT and the full rod track. And maybe you don't carry that kind of speed, or you're like, my dad was behind me and he's like, that's not fun for him, but it is for me. So
Right. Yeah. So if you're not into that stuff, you're
Yeah,
going to have a better experience riding a Summit X versus
for
the
sure.
Expert.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
for sure.
And interesting way, or you could think of it too as like, think of the Expert as more like motocross style riding, and the X is more like enduro. Where we keep using the word like technical on the Expert package, and it is, but it is with speed, like Steve says. Whereas the so think of that maybe with the Expert is more like it's at speed. You can still do it fast on the X too. It's just, I would say it's the easiest way is if people could think about it, like if they have a motorcycle background or at least even watched it, motocross would be like Expert, and, the X would be like the enduro kind of, or like, yeah, I guess enduro would be the right term. Or even if you're into cars, the X would be like a race car, and it's very planted. It's on its line, and you drive it on the line with speed. Whereas the X is more like a drift car. It's like, oh, you're sliding sideways here. Nope, gonna change my line and go the other way.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. Yeah. So if you want, if you want to ride experience that's just minimal effort and you're not very tired at the end of the day, Summit X is the way to go. And if you want to be able to get more out of a sled on a harsher edge, but you're willing to put in more physical effort, then the Summit Expert will be rewarding to you. Let's talk a minute about the free ride though. So we've defined the differences, the what's not the same and what is the same on the Summit X and Expert. Let's jump into the free ride for a minute. I know, Steve, that's kind of your buggy there. What's similar and what's different on the free ride?
The big difference is the freeride has a 36-inch ski stand, so it's more stable for jumping and doing big drops. And it has KYB Pro 40s on it, so that they're huge piston, big shaft, and it's to reduce fading and big bumps. Like I've never felt like, oh, the shocks are faded, because like if you're really pounding on a snowmobile, I remember in snowcross that by the end of a final, I could feel the suspension feels softer. You don't get that with a free ride ever. It has a solid rear arm and a 15-inch wide track, full rod, and that is, again, is for stability, for really aggressive riding, and for 25, it has that rack steering, and you see that in the RS 600 snowcross sled. It's like one of the most dominant snowcross sleds of all time, probably at this point. And where I'm really excited about that is like, 2 days ago we were riding in Logan and we found a pretty big jump, and there was three of us hitting the same line. And within like 3 or 4 runs, it was like full snowcross bumpy going into the face. And that's where that rack steering is going to be really nice. It's going to increase control in uneven conditions, and the rack steering will like let the skis track straighter through those big bumps. And especially on, like when you're landing really heavy and you bottom the front suspension, like the tie rods are parallel with the lower A-arm, so it's reducing bump steer. So it's something that like it's hard to, if you just jumped on one, you might not feel the difference, but it's going to improve your riding for sure.
Well, it gives you confidence, right? Like when you're pushing it to your limit or even the machine's limit, it still has stability and precise, control, right? And that's what builds confidence. I think that's what you're trying to, or that's what Steve's getting at. It's no matter how hard you beat on it or push on it, it will always be very, very consistent, and it's stable.
Yeah, for sure.
So much more suspension capacity, and that's like what you're talking about, Steve. That's for the guys that are jumping like big jumps, hitting moguls really hard, like almost like snowcross style, hammering down these single track mogul trails that we use to access the mountains, hitting everything you can at a higher speed than you would hit it on other sleds. And then there's rail bracing on the rear suspension. Overall, the Freeride is a heavier package. It carries a little more weight with some of the suspension capacity and rail bracing and on that. Talk about the narrower track. So the Summit X and Expert both have a 16 wide track, but the Freeride has a 15-inch wide track. How does that feel differently?
I'll go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, because that's funny you mentioned. That's exactly what I was thinking. Is the 15-inch is the track speed on it is way fast, like way faster. But so it's like, and that's where the Freeride shines is in, if you're doing all the bumps and jumps, it's usually not in deep powder. It'll be in a little bit less fluffy snow. So if you're riding knee deep or less, that's where it shines, and that's where the bumps develop, right? When it's really deep snow, you don't really get that much for bumps. And the 15-inch track definitely shines in track speed. Like even all the race sleds are all 15-inch, but it is super important to have the 16-inch versions, like in the X and the Expert, because just think of like snowboards or skis. Now they've all transitioned to fat tips. And everybody's riding fat skis for powder, and it's that leading edge from the drive shaft to the bottom of the curve in the rail, like where the attack angle, I guess you could call it, is that section of that's footprint. That's what helps lift you out of the snow, and that's what'll help crawl on top of the snow. So with the deep snow sleds, or like, even though the Freeride's in that family, but if you're really going after, where it's waist deep or deeper, that 16-inch track helps. That extra inch of belting in the front or track width will help lift the sled out of the snow. That's a short analogy on it anyway.
Steve, what do you feel on the track widths?
Yeah, a lot like what Carl said. I don't feel the penalty reducing from 15 to 16, but I'm like the light switch throttle guy, so I'm either wide open or it's off. And if I'm like crossing an old track on a side hill, I think the 15-inch wide offers a little more control, just because it's a little narrower. And or if you're like have an off-camber run into a jump, it's nice to the rear is a little more planted. That's how I feel
maybe.
here.
Yeah, maybe Steve. That's a good point. Is like, if you don't feel the penalty, because you're right, and that's why there's really so many things to think about if you're picking the right sled, because if you're small or like have a lighter weight, then like Steve says, you can get away with having that 15-inch track too. So there's multiple ways to look at things, and even like what your snowpack looks like, because sometimes when these sleds go out to different places, it's not like they always go where they're intended, right? Some people buy them out east or whatever, and they don't need a 16-inch wide track, where really a 15-inch wide track, especially in the shorter lengths of the Freeride, because I think it's a 286 pitch, is it not, Steve?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So then you can like actually rip it on the trails, and you don't have to worry about longevity. The 3.5-inch pitch, it works awesome in the powder, but when it's used outside of that and it's on hard pack trail, it's just a nature of the beast that they don't have the same longevity, right? It's like using a paddle tire from a dirt bike on a motocross track. It might have wicked track for a short amount of time, but it isn't going to last,
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, so to your dirt bike analogy, Carl, if the Summit X is enduro and the Summit Expert is motocross, the Freeride would be supercross or something along those lines, right?
Yeah, that's actually probably a great way to look at it.
For sure.
Supercross, so freestyle, even, like where, like Steve's saying, when you're jumping, and then turn sled 90 degrees in the air and land on the wall, like you could do it on the other sled, but you could just do it way faster on the Freeride,
Yeah.
and especially and to be realistically, like when you're hitting those jumps, just like Steve said, even if it is deep snow, you hit it a few times and then it turns into big bomb holes or bumps in front of it. And if that's, what your activities are going to be, then the Freeride, that's where it shines, especially rack steering. It's really is the entire package, that shines in that. So even if it is deep snow and you're just going to go and pound out some jumps, and do it repetitively, and then that Freeride is the weapon for that.
Yeah, and it's with that 36-inch front end, I've noticed too. It's like takes a lot of, especially with mine. run the ski shocks really, really stiff, and it's a lot more difficult to side hill than an Expert, or especially the Summit X. So I have to put a lot of effort into it when I'm following someone like Carl or even you, Ryan, through the trees. It's like I can tell I'm working a lot harder, but I've been riding it all year, so I'm used to it at this point. But if you're looking for just a side hill machine, there's two other snowmobiles that'll do it much better.
Yeah, and that's kind of some of the comments we saw going through the 2024 season and going into these 25s. You know, the Freeride comes in this really bold flare yellow colorway, and a lot of people kind of gravitate to that radical looking color, and they make a buying decision based on how cool the sleds look. But that might not be the best sled for what you actually want to go do, and you might have a totally different riding experience for the whole season if you're on an Expert or an X versus the Freeride.
Yeah, for sure. And it's crazy to think about. Like in 2011, we got 36-inch front ends, and I couldn't believe how easy they were to side hill. Now it's like, now we have 34s that about side hill themselves. And so going back to 36 was kind of goofy at first. Like I'm like, wow, I had to adjust my riding style a little bit. Now I just wheelie side hills now.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the just a whole nother thing is like how do you use the sled and in the Freeride, because are you riding a 46 right now, Steve?
Yeah.
So then and you got your weight will allow you to get away. You still have reasonable flotation on that thing, and now that it's shorter you can just wheelie it, so then you don't have to side hill it as much, right? Like there's lots of different ways to slice it. And one thing I was going to say is I wonder if people buy a sled, when they're buying sleds, if they buy them thinking of the, what the resale is going to be, like, oh man, it'll be easier to sell an Expert than an X, rather than just buying what they need, like how do we switch or educate people or help educate people, to really, pick the right sled.
Well, I think you two have done a very, very good job explaining that and kind of verbalizing, what the benefits and the drawbacks are to selecting any of these three models for the type of riding that you do. One thing I want to hit on real quick, the Summit X, going back to that, if you go pre-order a snowmobile by April 2nd at your Skidoo dealer or on Skidoo's website, you can choose and customize a Summit X or a Summit Expert or a Freeride. If you don't order one, before April 2nd and you wait until this fall, you're going to be your selection will be a little more limited down to the two in-season models, which are the Summit Adrenaline and the Summit Adrenaline with Edge package. And those have the same rear suspension and flex edge track as the Summit X. So if you don't spring order, you're going to have that flex edge set up, and you don't have the ability to go select the Summit Expert or the Freeride or customize yourself a Summit X.
I was having a thought about that too, Ryan, is, honestly, it's not a super expensive change either. Like if you had to buy one of the edges, or Edge with Adrenaline package, and you happen to be, somebody that's tall and, have, let's say, over 240 pounds, or over 200 pounds, and you feel that, it's, a little bit too responsive for your weight, or it feels, very, very responsive, and you want to tame that down, you could run the flex edge track and just put the XT rear arm in it and get rid of the T-motion. And think of it this way, as I described it too, as if you run flex edge and T-motion, that's like, enduro, and it's like running bib moose or whatever, running 4 pounds of air pressure in your rear tire. And if you run a straight rod track or no flex edge track, but with a T-motion, that's like running 6 pounds of air in your rear tire. And if you run the no flex edge with the XT, that's like running 12 pounds of air in your rear tire. Like if you kind of think of it that way, as far as how much the sled will move, or when you go to pull it over, so there's some tunability inside of that as well. So if you did get an X and then you feel that it's a little too responsive, you can change the rear arm, and that'll be it's, pretty easy. And if you bought an Expert and then you feel that, it's a little bit too much effort, then you can mix and match, and there's no, you're not going to wreck anything, and it's kind of an interesting option anyways.
Yeah, that's interesting. If you're on a 2024 or a 2023 or an older model and are wondering, what's new about the 2025s, I want to run through a few bullet points here real quick. The Summit X for 2025 gets a new front shock that has a little more capacity. It's pretty similar to what used to come on the Expert. It's not a piggyback shock. It's a lightweight shock, has a lightweight spring on it, and that it's about a pound lighter total between the two shocks. So Summit X got a little bit lighter for 2025. Also, there's a lower seat for the mountains, and all of the Summits get a new master brake cylinder, which opens up a little more space on the handlebar, so you have more adjustability on where you want that brake lever to sit next to your grip. The Summit Expert, like Steve and Carl have said, for 2025 has new KYB Pro 36 front shocks. These are piggyback shocks, higher capacity and more resistant to fading. A little more stability and side heeling. There's an updated DS4, Pilot DS4 ski design. The tail end of the ski, the profile is a little bit different. It's tapered in. That change hits the Summit Expert and the Freeride. And so the Expert picks up a little bit weight with those piggyback shocks. I think it picks up a couple pounds. So the Expert is going to be about 10 pounds heavier than a Summit X. And then what's new on the 2025 Freeride, like you guys have talked about, there's the rack steering system, which is a quite a bit different style than what's on the X and the Expert. It also gets the new master brake cylinder to open up the handlebars there. And am I missing anything there? It also has the low seat. There's a couple new accessories that are really cool too. A new mountain seat and a new hood storage bag. Did you guys get a
I'm
chance to look
excited
at
about
those?
that. Yeah, I'm really excited about that storage bag. I love the zip feature, and it's really deep, so you can put all sorts of stuff in there. That's nice. That new DS4 ski, I've been riding it for the last few weeks, and it's a huge improvement. I really like that DS4 ski when the snow's super deep and it's brand new. So like the last few months, but if like a lot of you guys have had 23s and 24s, if you're counter steering across an old track, or I noticed it last year in spring snow, took a lot of effort to counter steer it because the ski wants to go straight, and there's a template floating around, and I trimmed mine to the 25 spec, and I could not believe the difference it made. It's so much easier to counter steer, and you don't get all this feedback when you're going across an old track anymore. It's a huge improvement.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that template is actually a Skidoo part number. I'm just trying to look it up right now, but your dealer will for sure be able to point you in the right direction for that, for sure.
Yeah, so if you have a 24 or 23, you can go modify your ski to make it match the 25 profile. Carl, one other change across all three models, all deep snow Skidoo models now come with the short riser block, which is 120 millimeters. Talk about that versus the taller riser blocks that we've used to see on sleds.
Yeah, I mean the way that the snowmobiles now, I should say with snowmobiles, but the way that the Skidoos now, because even whether it's an Expert or a Freeride or an X, they really respond to running board weight placement. So you really steer the sled by your feet, not so much your hands. And if your knees are bent and you run in a more of a bent knee position, even if you have to wear knee pads and kneel one against the panel and one against the seat or whatever, like, or wide stance. And when your knees are bent, you have a lot better balance, and then you can really pinpoint the weight on the running board. And so that's where the lower handlebars, really, we've transitioned back to lower bars, because when the sled is, let's say, leaning downhill and you're on the uphill side and you want to get it back up on edge, that's where the lower bar helps, because it doesn't bend you at the waist, because the more you bend at the waist, the less and less balance you have and the less and less strength you have. So at least with a low riser, forces you to ride with that knee bend, and you can get it back up on edge. And it's just, think of it as a small sailboat with a really tall mast. So if you have a taller than necessary handlebar riser, then you just are doing a way more motions with your upper body than what's required. And I would say like that riser's pretty in the ballpark for, 6 feet, and less. A lot of our guides that are, let's say 5'9" or less, they all run the shortest riser. And when we're racing, we all run the shortest riser too, which I think is a 90 millimeter. Steve, do you know that off?
Yep, I think 90 or 95. I know it's 3.7 inches.
Yeah. So, and when we're racing, we're all like Jason, maybe everybody is, and Jason's probably 6'1", and he runs the 90 millimeter like for racing, and I mean, honestly, if you're riding a shorter sled, or you prefer to ride a shorter sled, I would probably tend to ride a shorter handlebar riser as well, just because then when the sled's always wheeling or in your face, the closer your chest is or your upper body to the center line of the sled while it's in a wheelie, the more control you have of the sled. If you're just hanging out the back, I mean, it's harder to control the sled because now its center line becomes on top of you rather than you being on top of the sled weight center line. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And you know what, honestly, if you're willing to put the time in, you'll get used to the lower riser for sure, and you'll find the advantage in it. If you really want a taller riser, though, your dealer can set you up with an accessory riser in different heights there. One other thing we haven't talked about is the 10.25 inch color touchscreen display with BRP Connect now comes with built-in GPS, so you can you no longer have to have your phone connected to see maps and to be able to pull up maps and see where you're at on the screen. You can still connect your phone and have other features through the BRP Connect app. So some cool new features there. We'll let you guys go. We appreciate you coming on the show and talking about the 2025 Summit X, Summit Expert, and 2025 Freeride and the differences in there. Again, you can go to your local Skidoo dealer and pre-order your own customized Skidoo snowmobile. You got to do that by April 2nd, 2024. And if you don't, this fall you can check out what's in your dealer's showroom. You'll have access to the Summit Adrenaline and Summit Adrenaline with Edge package. Any parting thoughts, guys?
Yeah, is GPS stand for Great Performance Snowmobile? I don't know what GPS is.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's some limitations on radio frequency stuff up there.
Yeah, they don't have in Canada. We just still use soup cans with string. Yeah, maybe our younger listeners don't know what that means.
Yeah, probably not. Well, that is cool though to see that on that screen.
Yeah, it is.
Steve, anything before we take off?
No, thanks for having me. And we need to get out and go riding. I want to get a Snow West cover photo.
Oh yeah,
that's my next goal.
Yeah, we got some bangers out of this last shoot. There's some good stuff in there.
Good. Yeah, I didn't even wreck a snowmobile, so it was a success.
Yeah, we might run a picture of you, but we'll say it's Carl though by accident.
Yeah, I think the difference is shocking though. Like, what happened to Carl? He got short.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, just know they'll say it's Tony.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah. We'll say it's Tony. All right. Thanks for coming on the show, guys. We appreciate the input. A lot of good information, and we'll catch you another time. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys.